Hey, it's Brian, and over the past couple of months I've been trying to learn how to sculpt and model characters in 3D. With each project I've been trying to learn a bit about at least one new thing that I can use to help me create a character. This time I wanted to learn how to create armor and attach it, so I chose to sculpt Samus from Metroid. So when I say attach armor, I mean attach it to a rig. I know that I could just sculpt or model it in place for a still image, but I'd like to eventually be able to make characters that can be used for animation or maybe in a game. So with this Samus model, I'm wanting to have a character that can deform with the hard surfaces attached that don't. So to get started, I sketched a reference and brought it into Blender to start blocking out Samus. If you think about it, blocking the character out in 3D is a lot like blocking out a sketch in 2D by using simple shapes like cylinders and circles. So here in the 3D space, I'm using cubes and spheres, extruding or adding loop cuts, pushing and pulling on vertices to get the shapes to match my reference. After I'm finished with the blockout phase, I apply all the modifiers and join the shapes together, minus the hands and the head. I bring them into sculpt mode and remesh them to make all of the shapes that make up the body into one solid piece of geometry. I go on to smooth all the transitions with the smooth brush. While I'm smoothing around the body, I'm also sculpting in a few of the details that I didn't get from blocking out, like the collarbones, the elbows, knees, booty cheeks, those kind of things. For the head, I decided to revisit a course that I'd purchased a couple of months ago called How to Sculpt a Stylized Head in Blender by Danny Mac 3D. I had taken it once before and really enjoyed the process. He took things slow enough for me to not have to pause or rewind anything, and the best part, I came out of it learning quite a bit and sculpted a nice bust in the process. Susie from Little Witch Academia is what I decided to make with my first bust, following Danny's course along with a few other tutorials around YouTube. But anyways, I'm not trying to be an ad for this thing or anything. There are free head sculpting tutorials out there. I just jumped onto this one because it was in a particular style that I was interested in. So yeah, I followed this course as a refresher to sculpt the head. And it's around this part that I'll usually start throwing parts of the mesh into QuadRemesher and let it auto retopologize to get the poly count down. It does a pretty good job and it's super helpful for quick and dirty retopology for sculpts, but doesn't focus on areas that need certain geometry setups for deformations if you're going to rig the character. So I decided that I'd manually retopo this thing and rig it and keep a copy of it as a base mesh that I could maybe use later on for other projects. Maybe allowing me to skip out on the blocking out phase, or at the very least, shrink wrap the base to the later sculpt to save myself from having to retopo it. To retopologize the head, I followed Danny Mac's same course since later on he added some videos on retopology, but any retopology tutorial on YouTube should get you where you need to go. Danny's course was just about sculpting a bust, so the retopology video stopped there. So to finish off, I followed Pixelica's body retopology video, which I highly recommend. After retopology, I was going to drop in a rigify armature, but decided to try out something I'd never done before, which was have a rigged face. But before I do that, I need to have an inner mouth and teeth. Luckily, Dicko covers this with his modeling for animation videos, particularly part 6 for the mouth sack. And for the teeth, I kind of just winged it a little bit with a cylinder that I split in half and beveled the edges. Duplicated the top and flipped it over just to get the bottom. It's not very accurate, but it's okay for stylized characters. Usually when I add in the human meta rig, I delete all the face bones. But not this time. We're going to keep all this mess and try to figure out how it works. I followed Blender.org's Blender Manual Bone Positioning Guide to align the face rig, but I would also recommend CG Dive's video on the new Rigify face in Blender 3 Plus if you'd rather watch a video than read the doc. As I was positioning the bones, I came across the tongue bone, and that's when I realized I forgot to model the tongue. So I dropped in a subdivided cube and added a few loop cuts and stretched it out for a quick and dirty liquor. The rest of the rigging process was pretty basic stuff, just putting bones where they should be. You can follow the same Blender.org manual for this or any other Rigify video. After a quick rig test, it's time to start on the armor. I start off by dropping in some shapes to block out where I need the important things to go and what size I need them to be. I duplicated some of her torso, her bicep and forearm, and some of the geometry for her hands minus the joints. Added a solidify modifier to raise them above the base mesh. For the torso armor, I brought it into sculpt mode and started sketching the armor plating pattern. I'm not following any kind of official design or anything, just trying for a pattern that looks cool. Next, I started extruding a plane and follow the shape of the sketch, same as when retopologizing, but keeping a gap between each of the pieces. After I finished, I went back and pulled the edges closer together so there would be less of a gap between everything. Added a subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out, solidify modifier to raise the geometry, and a bevel modifier to sharpen the edges. I did the thigh armor the same way by duplicating the geometry, sketching the design, doing the retopology, and adding the modifiers. By this time, I felt pretty confident in what I was doing, so I started skipping the sculpting part and just started extruding verts with the shrink wrap modifier and snapping turned on to make the designs for the armor. For her chest plate booby armor thing, I took what I was using for block out and brought it into sculpt mode and got a rough shape of what I wanted, using a lot of the scrape brush to make flat planes and a little of the pinch brush to sharpen the corners, and I dug out the channels for the lights with a clay strips brush. Then it's on to retopology, then adding subsurf modifier and the bevel modifier. I took a cylinder and tapered the top down and added some loop cuts in to make some mechanical designs, cut it in half and threw it on her back for some rocket boosters. Next I made a bunch of these cylinders that hold these glowy balls and put them all over the place. I don't know what they're really for, but she's got them and they glow. I finished up the rest of her leg armor, arms, and the boots the same way as before, not really following any reference, just winging it as I go. Her arm cannon was modeled very similarly to the way her back rockets are, but with glowy balls on the side. To make those huge shoulder pad things, I took a UV sphere and cut a third of it off and placed it on her shoulder. Then took a cube and shaped it to be the negative to what I wanted to cut out of the sphere and apply the Boolean modifier. I apparently lost the rest of the footage for this part, but to finish off the shoulder pad, I extruded some channels in for the lights and added some squished spheres for the fins and added yet another one of those glowy light balls to the front and the back. For the eyebrows, I duplicated some of the existing geometry of the face and separated it into its own mesh and got it into the shape that I wanted. The cool thing about doing this after it's rigged is that since it's duplicated from the head, it has the same weight paints as the geometry it was copied from, so it isn't going to clip and will follow the face controls. I used paths to make the hair and used a rectangle as a reference for the bevel so that it would have sort of a boxy look to it. Placing the paths can be a bit tedious, especially when you're using a bevel shape, because moving the tips can make the entire shape rotate. You can manually rotate each point back to where you need them with Control T. Also, if you want to have the same shape on the other side and still want to edit it, you might want to duplicate and flip the curve instead of using a mirror modifier, since in order to apply the mirror, you have to convert the curve to a mesh, which would make you lose control over the path. But for things like the back of the hair, which isn't going to move, mirroring is fine. I keep duplicating the curve to fill half of her head, minus the middle, then add a mirror modifier, fill the gap on the top and the bottom with another strand, and we're done. Add a torus for the scrunchie and a single curve for the ponytail, and from here I add some thinner curves for the stray hairs. Now I'm editing the rectangle that the curve is using as a reference for the bevel. This is what will give us all the detail in the hair. After I settle for the bevel design of the main hair, I created a separate reference for the ponytail. Now to attach the armor to the rig. In order to figure this out, I followed Colby Weaver's video, How to Rig Armor. To do this, we select a piece of the armor, then shift select the armature, go into pose mode, select the bone you want to parent it to, press Ctrl P, and then select bone from the drop down menu. After a quick test, we see that the armor moves with the rig and doesn't deform. I did notice that if you overstretch the limb in IK mode, instead of stretching the armor, it'll scale it. But after thinking about it a week later, I suppose you could turn off stretching in the controls, or what I'd probably do next time, parent the armor piece to the rig with empty groups, then assign it to a single vertex group. Either way, I did the same thing with all of the armor pieces except for the torso plates and her boot soles, which I parented with automatic weights since I do want them to deform. Now to test the rig out with some posing, I shrank the hand down behind her arm cannon with the hand IK control in order to hide it. I also noticed that her head looked really big, so with the head and neck controllers, I scaled down to where it doesn't look as goofy. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how the rig turned out. It seems to be deforming pretty okay without any weight painting or shape keys, and the face rig really surprised me. All that's left to do is get her in a cool pose. I chose to go with a sort of downward kick or jump with a mad yelly face. For the materials, I took the easy way out since I was exhausted by this point. I used blendkit's free PBRs and edited the base colors, which worked pretty fine for a lot of the armor. Later on, I ended up running across Dicko's texturing stylized character series that I'm definitely going to try out on the next one. To finish things up, I added a multi-res modifier and sculpted in a few details to the face, and added a 3-point light setup, which you can do automatically via the tri-lighting add-on that comes with Blender. Just enable it in the preferences. Oh, and I also added a big green light as well, since that seems to be the Metroid-y thing to do. And here we have it, the finished render. This one took around 24 hours total to finish, which a lot of the time was spent finding and watching tutorials. Hey, thanks for watching this one and hanging out while I try to learn how to do this stuff. I'm having a ton of fun trying it out. Hopefully as time goes on I'll get better at this 3D stuff, and if you want to use this rigged base mesh that I made in this video, you can grab it over on my Gumroad for free. And I know I've been saying that I'll get around to making the sculpts available so you guys can print them out. I have to admit though, I still haven't read up on how to optimize a sculpt for printing. I was thinking about just throwing the blend files up on Gumroad and letting whoever wants to optimize them for printing just do it themselves, but the files can get a little bit big, so I'm gonna have to get around to watching Grant Abbott's video on preparing models for printing, I guess. But thanks again for watching. Subscribe for more sculpts. I promise I'll get better. Bye!